Norman Hatch was 74 years old, a retired plant manager from rural Kentucky, and he had been saying things like that his whole life. He said it on camera, between rounds of Family Feud, with the casual authority of a man who has not been challenged in a long time. You know, Harvey, you got lucky. Somebody gave you a chance, and you wrote it. That's all it is. He said it with a small, specific smile, not malicious, but the deeper and more settled kind. The smile of a worldview that has never needed defending. Steve Harvey heard it. The studio heard it. The audience heard it. 300 people went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with game show tension. And Steve Harvey, who has spent 30 years building a career on knowing exactly which response a moment needs, put down his cards, placed them on the podium with the specific slowness of a man choosing his words, and said, "Norman, sit down for a second. Because I've been waiting my whole career for somebody to say exactly that to me on camera. And I'm going to answer it properly." What followed was the most viewed 2-minute response in game show history. It was a Tuesday in February, a regular taping day at ImageWorks Studios in Atlanta. The Hatch family from Harlan County, Kentucky, had come in a rented SUV. Norman, his son Brett, Brett's wife Angela, Norman's daughter Sharon, and Sharon's husband Kevin. They were sharp, competitive, and had done well in early rounds. Norman was the family patriarch in the way that certain men become it, by size, by volume, by the weight of opinion accumulated over 74 years. He was not a cruel man in the private sense. He was a man who had simply never been shown clearly enough what his words did when they left his mouth. The taping had been going well. The Hatch family had played 4 rounds with skill and humor. Norman had an old-fashioned showmanship. He gave the audience gestures and grins and read the board like he'd been studying it for weeks. Steve had enjoyed him. They had bantered. The audience had responded. It was, up until that moment, a good taping day. Then Norman had said it. Not during a question. Not during a game moment, simply in the space between things, when Norman had been watching Steve from across the stage and had said what he had apparently been thinking. Steve Harvey heard it. He did not react immediately. He stood at the podium and looked at Norman Hatch for 3 full seconds. The room had gone quiet. Not the audience, the air. And that wasn't even the part that changed television history. Steve set his cards down slowly. He said, "Norman, sit down for a second." It was not angry. It was something else, the voice of a man who has been carrying an answer for 30 years and has finally been given the opportunity to deliver it correctly. Norman sat. Brett looked at his father with an expression that suggested he had seen this movie before and knew how it ended. Steve Harvey walked away from the podium. He walked to the center of the stage, where the cameras had the clearest angle. He looked directly at Norman. He said, "I got lucky. Let me tell you about my luck." He talked for 2 minutes and 7 seconds. The audience did not make a sound. He said that in 1985 he was sleeping in a 1976 Ford Tempo in Cleveland, Ohio. He said the car had 140,000 miles on it and a broken passenger window he had taped over with plastic. He said he was showering in gas station bathrooms, eating from dumpsters behind restaurants, and performing stand-up comedy in clubs where he made $15 a night, sometimes 20, and where the audience came for the free drinks more than for the comedy. He said he had been doing that for 3 years. He said the only luck he had in those 3 years was that he did not die. He said he had called a comedy club in Louisville, Kentucky, to ask for an audition slot in 1987. The man on the phone had laughed at him, not because his pitch was weak, because he had a black name and a southern accent, and the club had a demographic they were comfortable with, and he was not it. He said he called back. He called 8 more times over 4 months. He said on the 9th call the man said, "Fine, come in," just to get him to stop calling. He had driven to Louisville in the Tempo. He had gotten on stage. He had killed it. He said the man who ran the club had never apologized, had never addressed what had been behind the 9 calls, but had booked him for a run of 12 shows. He said he had taken every show. He had eaten gas station food between them. He had slept in the car 4 of the 12 nights because he could not afford the motel. He said, "Norman, that's my luck. 3 years in a car. 9 phone calls, 12 shows. A man who wouldn't book me for reasons that had nothing to do with whether I was funny." He paused. The people who call it luck are the people who didn't have to make the 9th call. The studio fell completely silent. Steve Harvey was not done. He said, "I'm not mad at you. I want you to understand that. I've been where you are, in a different way, where the thing you believe feels so normal you don't notice it, has weight. I grew up in Glenville, Ohio, with a father who worked in a steel mill and who told me every single night that I was smart and capable and had as much right to anything in this country as any other man. And he was telling me that because the world was telling me something different every day. Your world wasn't telling you that about yourself. It was telling you something easier. So I get it." He turned to the camera. He said, "I want to talk to everyone watching at home for a second. Every single person who has ever been told they got lucky when what they actually did was stay alive, stay in it, make 9 calls when the first 8 didn't work. This is for you. Your persistence is not luck. Your survival is not luck. What you've built from nothing is not luck. Anyone who hasn't done it doesn't get to name it." He turned back to Norman Hatch. Norman Hatch, 74 years old, retired plant manager, man who had been saying things for his whole life without being answered, was very quiet. His son Brett had his eyes on the floor. His daughter Sharon had her hand over her mouth. Norman himself was looking at Steve Harvey with an expression that required some decoding. It was not shame, exactly. It was the look of a man who has said something in a room and found that the room had the answer. Norman said, after a long pause, "I didn't know about the car." Steve said, "Most people don't. That's how it works." There was another silence. And then Norman Hatch said something that no one in that studio expected. He said, "I was wrong to say it the way I said it. It was not a full accounting. It was not the speech his children might have written for him. But it was real." Steve Harvey nodded once. He said, "That's all I needed." He pulled out his phone and called his foundation director. He announced on the taping floor a $25,000 contribution to the youth mentorship initiative he had founded in 2016, specifically to support first-generation performers and artists from low-income backgrounds. He said, because 22-year-old Steve Harvey needed somebody to make that 9th call possible. And I'm going to make sure somebody's out there making it possible now. He announced both families would receive the day's prize. The competing family, the Riveras from San Antonio, who had stood at their podium in complete stillness through all of it, applauded with the energy of people who had just watched something they would describe to their children. The episode aired 5 weeks later. The 2-minute and 7-second clip was viewed 340 million times in the first 11 days, making it the most watched clip in Family Feud's 45-year history. The hashtag, The 9th Call, was used in 31 countries and became the title of a TED Talk given by a sociologist studying the persistence gap between first-generation professionals and legacy network hires. 3 months after the taping, Norman Hatch's daughter Sharon wrote Steve Harvey a letter. In it, she described a dinner table conversation that had taken place 2 weeks after the episode aired. A conversation about luck and work and what her father had been carrying without examining. She said it had not resolved everything. She said it had opened something. She said her father had watched the clip 3 times. She said she didn't know if that was enough. She said she was grateful anyway. Steve Harvey read the letter on his radio show. He said he read it because Sharon Hatch deserved to be heard. He said, "That's what conversations are supposed to do. Open something. It doesn't have to close perfectly." A year after the taping, Steve Harvey's Youth Mentorship Initiative had expanded its first-generation performer track by 40%, supporting 847 young performers and artists who had not grown up with networks or resources. The fund was now called the Ninth Call Initiative. The name had been chosen by the program's first cohort, who voted on it unanimously. Steve Harvey said, in a commencement address at Howard University 18 months after the episode, "The difference between luck and work is who's watching when you make the ninth call. I was lucky that I finally got a camera. Most people don't. So make sure somebody sees the work. If this story about what 30 years of persistence actually looks like, and the 2 minutes that finally gave it a name, moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who has been told their success was luck, when what it actually was is survival." Have you ever had to make the ninth call? Let us know in the comments, and ring that notification bell for more moments that remind us what the real story behind success actually looks like.